good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the multiverse. Welcome to episode 87 of Daily Dose of Dino, or as I prefer to call it, your daily shot of vitamin D3 for your mind, just to get your thinking apparatus into gear so that you start thinking more effectively, ask better questions, get better answers, and therefore solve the right problems in your business, take better and more effective action, and get better results, which is really how that works. As we frequently say, success engineers, business is an intellectual sport. So in order to win at the game of business, you need to think more effectively. And that's frankly just how it works. If you study the most successful people on the planet, they basically outthink the problems that come their way and the competition. That's what they do. And then, of course, they take action because thinking on its own is never enough. So we have been talking all this week about making better decisions. We are on episode 87, which is the fifth episode of this weekly series. It started on Monday. So we looked at the four things on Monday that tend to derail or confuse or otherwise skew our decision making. So really the root causes, if you like, of why we make poor decisions, why we could make better decisions. And they were what I call kind of good versus evil, the kind of or instead of the and. So we tend to go for something that we think would be a good idea, and we tend to miss all the other things that we could do. So instead of the and, which is this kind of more expansive way of looking at the solution to the problem, if you will, or the decision that we're making, we get into this kind of for and against, two-column approach, which is here are all the things I think will make this decision a good decision. Here are all the things that will make this decision not such a good decision. And we weigh that up without actually looking at the decision in context of all the decisions that we could make. Yeah. And all the things we could take a punt for. So that was the first of them. Then we looked at confirmation bias, which is basically simply we're looking for validation of the idea, which is really an extension of what I've just talked about. Then we talked about emotional bias, which we got into yesterday, where we've essentially made the decision because of our hearts and our feelings. We've gone after the thing that we kind of want or we think would be a good idea. We really, more correctly, we feel it would be a good idea. And then today we're really going to talk about bullishness and super or overconfidence. Now, the R4 framework that tackles all of this that we've developed, the R4 decision-making framework, and there are other bits to this, but we don't have time on a D3 to get into this, were our reframe. So we reframe and we kind of widen our perspective on the decision that we're making. We ask a more open, a much bigger question. So I mentioned, for example, that the laptop I'm talking to you from is an HP G2 EliteBook, very, very similar to the Microsoft Surface Pro, if you know it. And I arrived at this not because I said I want a tablet come laptop like the Surface Pro, but because I said I want to be mobile, but I need a lot of power when I'm traveling because I do video editing, etc., etc. What's going to satisfy that requirement? Wider question, yeah. And then I got into the more reductive reasoning, if you like, for the 7 or 8 candidates that came out of that because I put a specification together. So that's the kind of approach of reframing. Widen the question, widen your frame, if you will. Narrow framing, which is really just looking at one or two options, is the death of a good decision. Yeah. So that was the first way we tackle the kind of good versus evil thing that I called it. And then we get into confirmation bias. And that, frankly, is just a reality check. And I gave you a few tools on Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't remember. Go and have a look on this. Then we got yesterday into emotional bias, and I talked about removing yourself from the situation. So putting some distance between yourself and the situation. And we performed a kind of, or we talked about the nearest thing to a kind of decision-making magic trick, if you will. Where one of the two techniques for this is to ask the best friend question. Yeah, what would your best friend do? Sorry, what would you tell your best friend if they were in your situation? And inevitably, we get straight to the heart of what really is the best decision. Yeah, we don't get confused by all the other stuff. In simple terms, when we ask the best friend question, we see the wood through all the trees. We're not messed up by just being in the middle of the thick of the trees and not seeing the wood for the trees. Yeah, so that's what we do. So that's the first three of the R4 framework: reframe, reality check, and remove. Now we're going to talk about responsibility today. And this is really about taking responsibility for the possibility that this thing might go wrong. So we're going to talk about responsibility. So that's the sweep up for the week. That's kind of how we got to where we are. Now we're going to talk about the two components really of this, really as I see it. So let's have a look at the two components of taking responsibility for it all going tits up, basically, all going pear-shaped. Well, the first is revisit. Yeah, have a trigger or a gatekeeper or a sense check, or you might call it a tripwire. It's one of the terms I particularly like, where if you make the decision, this is after you've made the decision, you've got something that essentially tells you if it's going in the right direction, it's on or off track. And a tripwire really is one of the kind of rules that I picked up from a great thinker, a guy called Adam Urbanski, a couple of 3 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that actually now. Is that he has a rule around if he puts a product together for like an online course or whatever, it has to make a certain amount of money. It has to kind of get that ROI for his time where he won't start it. So it might arbitrarily for you, that might be £100,000, or it might be $2 million, or it might be 50 grand or whatever. But basically, if you kind of extend this idea, it's if I'm going to make a decision and go do this thing, go buy this thing, go be involved in this thing, yeah, it has to give me this return. And it has to give me this return in itself is a tripwire. Now, what you can do is you can put stages in so that you just check that it's on track. Simon and I call that green shoots. You're looking at leading indicators that tell you early on that the thing's actually starting to work, rather than you're hitting and hope, yeah, and hoping. So that's the kind of idea behind it. So think about this. Think of any amount of examples. It might be, like I say, it might be if we're talking about an online situation. Maybe you're a coach and you're trying to get your IP, all that great stuff that's in your head, down into a digital form so that you can leverage all of that, create a course, and maybe do group coaching so that you're getting a better return for your time in terms of the money that flows back to you for the expertise and the benefit and the value that you give. And you look at that and think, right, well, that's going to take me 2 or 3 months to put something together that I'm going to be happy with. What do I, and over that time, I'm probably going to spend 2 weeks worth of my time actually building it. So there's 80 hours, 90 hours, whatever your working week is. What kind of return do I need from that in order to make that sensible? Because the opportunity cost of doing that versus going and literally just coaching could be tens of thousands of pounds or whatever your rate is. So you think about that and you think, okay, well, if I make, I don't know, let's just say arbitrary, if I make 80 grand from this thing, I'll be okay. But really what I want to do is make about 150K from it. Okay, so 80 grand's what we want. So within 3-4 months, we're looking to make, say, 40K. So there's your tripwire. Yeah, does that make sense? And all you do is just set that and forget it and go and do the thing. Get it built, start to roll it out, start to sell it, start to change some lives, and then look at the income that's starting to come in. Tweak that, do all the things that you have to do, because obviously this is a very simplistic model. But when you get to the point that you said, which is in, say, 4 months, the tripwire goes off, yeah? It triggers, and you're looking to say, right, what have I done? Well, I've done 30K. But I can see that I'm on track. Yeah, it's okay. I need to do a few tweaks, but we're nearly there. Or I've done 50, 60, 80K, I've blown it out of the park. Or this thing's done 10K. Maybe this wasn't a great decision. Yeah. So that's the first of the kind of two components. Now, there's an element of this I'm going to mention, but I'm not going to get into it in any depth today because it's a whole topic in itself. But so that's the tripwire or kind of gatekeeper sense check idea, yeah. And one of the things it does is it kind of ensures against the downside of the thing sliding, yeah, which is a damn useful thing. So you can relax and just focus on rolling with the decision, implementing or executing the decision, and it gives you that kind of safety net, if you will, yeah, just that you know that you're going to be checking on this thing, but you don't have to constantly agonize about it. So that's the first thing. The second component is a thing that I call future hindsight, but actually Gary Klein, the psychologist, called in the Harvard Business Review in 2007, cracking article, called it prospective hindsight. And this is a situation essentially where you are looking into the future, but you're actually in the future looking back. If that makes more sense, yeah. And he came up. What it led to was he came up with the concept of a pre-mortem. Now we all know that a post-mortem is an investigation after the death of something. Yeah, something's not happening. You know, quite often with projects, when a project has died, or a patient's died, or an individual's died, or whatever. He came up with the idea on the basis of this of a pre-mortem, which is a genius idea. This is the second component of taking responsibility for things, the possibility that things could go wrong. It also clears obsession out of the way, obsession with your idea that your idea must work. You know, I said on Monday, nobody's baby is ugly. Yeah, nobody wants to hear that, but there are some ugly babies in the world. Sometimes the truth, there's, yeah, I'm not suggesting anybody should walk up to anybody and say, "Oh, is that your baby? Isn't he ugly?" I really don't think that's something that we want to be doing to people. We need to be a bit more sensitive. But the facts are, there are some pug ugly kids out there, because there are. Yeah. Now, yeah, all humans are beautiful on the inside, but this is what I'm saying. Aesthetically, it happens. Yeah. But nobody wants to hear that, and rightly so. But in business, we don't have the luxury of that. When it's your kid and it's a human being, that's a whole different argument. But when it's your business, you've really got to be objective, properly objective, because that kind of subjectivity and weddedness, that kind of, to an idea or an obsession is a killer. Yeah. So in the idea of the pre-mortem, we imagine a future death of the idea, of the decision, of the project, the thing that we're rolling with. Okay. And you put yourself in a situation. Imagine you've got a small team, and Justin, this is probably useful for you actually at HP, because it's a cracking little idea. Use this a few times. It's very, very effective. You get yourself in a huddle, get into the war room, if you will, and you get the various elements. Now, in a business where you wear kind of all the hats, you would be finance and marketing and sales and logistics and so on and so forth, right? And leadership. Well, of course, in a business where there's a team that will do all of this, you assemble the team or the various teams together. And you basically just hit the guys with, right, okay, guys, so this project, this idea that we've had, we're now a year into the future. That's where we are. And it's been a total goddamn fiasco. Half of us have been fired. We're being sued. It's a goddamn nightmare. Yeah. It's all gone wrong. So we're now going to split into the relevant departments and teams, and individually, without collusion, without discussion, we're going to have a look at our part in this and where it went wrong. So this is actually a really, really, cute version, if you like, that Klein came up with of what I talked about when I did mental models 2 or 3 weeks ago, when I talked about the inversion principle, which is taking an idea that you want, the thing that you want, turning it on its head, literally inverting it, and then looking at the opposite of what you want as an outcome and thinking about how that comes about. This is a kind of a really neat, if you like, version of that, nicely packaged up into this idea of the pre-mortem. Does it make sense? So we've all been sued, all fired. Yeah, we're being sued. Half of us have been fired. Yada yada. It's a fiasco. It's a nightmare. It's horrible. Let's go into our huddles and let's work out through separate analysis what went wrong in terms of our part of this. Yeah. Then you come back and start comparing the notes, and then you mesh all that together and look at all of the things that went wrong with this fictitious, death, if you like, which obviously we're looking at retrospectively because we propelled ourselves a year or 6 months or whatever into the future. Yeah. Now, by the way, the technique here is very, very similar to Edward de Bono's 6 hats thinking. If you don't know about 6 hats thinking, again, if you've got a group of people, it's a great, great way of assembling people together and stopping the kind of infighting from partisanship, if you will. So I'll give you a couple of examples of the way this works. But basically, de Bono took the style of thinking that we needed. So, for example, he would look at the big picture idea rather than the granular detail and say, well, that's the blue hat. So you stick the blue hat in the middle of the table. Now we're all thinking big picture when we think about this new idea that somebody's had. Then we start looking at the facts and just the facts. We don't get into supposition or opinion. That's the white hat, which goes in the center. Then we get highly critical of this and judgmental. The black hat goes in the center. So everybody dons that hat. Does that make sense? So we unify our approach. Another great thing is if you've got ideas around this, and this is why you go separately when you're running a pre-mortem, you don't come back, when you're sitting in a meeting, sometimes with yourself actually, or with a buddy, or with a partner, and somebody has an idea, one of you has an idea. Sometimes everybody goes after the idea because it sounds like a good idea, and the other idea that the other person might have had just gets buried. Yeah. So one of the reasons for separating everybody is for them to come up with their own feedback before you come together, and then go, right, okay, what have you got? What have you got? What have you got? What have you got? Now we're going to analyze all of this. We're going to bring it all together. Yeah. And kind of, because there's faulty decision making baked into the kind of round robin approach, where we ask somebody for an idea and they vocalize the idea before everybody else has got their ideas together. So I'm a big fan, particularly with teams, of getting everybody, when we put a question out, getting everybody to write their answers down. Then we start going around everybody so we can actually see what's come out of the group. Because you never know, somebody comes up with a fantastic idea sounding, and somebody two questions along or two seats along has an even better idea we never get to. Yeah. So that's the reason for separating everybody out and then bringing them back together, and also for using something like 6 hats for the analysis, which is really useful. Again, I could do 2 days just on 6 hats thinking. Yeah. So what's the real benefit of this all in? Well, the benefit is that you get to brainstorm failure without experiencing the drama of it. Yeah, you get to brainstorm failure using a pre-mortem without experiencing the drama of it. So you're not caught in that emotion, which can really skew your thinking. Yeah. So that's it. I wanted to make this one reasonably tight. So we've gone through the 4 things that derail or skew better decision making, or frankly any decent decision making. At the start of the week, I've just done a sweep of that. We talked about the R4 framework, which is reframing. So essentially, instead of falling victim to narrow framing and looking at 1 or 2 options, widening the frame, widening the question, and starting to ask better questions about what it is that we actually want out of this decision. Yeah. We talked about a reality check, where we start to really kind of take, we start to really apply some sensible lenses, if you like, to our confirmation bias, because really what that does is it eliminates confirmation bias. We then remove ourselves from the frame or from the picture to negate or mitigate any emotional bias. And I talked about asking the best friend question. What would if this was your best friend, what would you say? Yeah, what would you suggest they do or advise them to do? And then today we've talked about taking responsibility for the possibility that it might be wrong. Yeah, taking responsibility for that. So that's the R4 framework of the 4 R's. Now, the thing I left out, and I said I'd give a nod to, is an idea called decision journaling, or a decision register, we used to call it back in the day. And really, it allows you, particularly if you journal, which I thoroughly recommend, is writing down, in the day when you make a decision about something, write the decision down, put down why you made the decision at the time, or why you think you made the decision at the time, what you're hoping the outcome would be, and leave a bloody big gap. And then, have a trigger somewhere that causes you to go back and look at your decisions in your journal every month or every 3 months, no more than that, I would say, and look at where your decisions have taken you, and then write below the decision what your evaluation of that decision is. So you then start the process of determining whether that was a good decision, a mediocre decision, a poor decision, or a god-awful decision. Yeah. And you'll find just by doing that one thing, your decision making will get better, because you don't let yourself off the hook. It's a skill like anything else, and this is a great way of actually sharpening and honing that skill. So that is it. So wherever you are in the multiverse, take care.